really grateful. And, when I listen to all my predecessors' discussions and talks, I'm humbled by the tremendous amount of knowledge and wealth that it brings to the table. And that really makes this discussion enriching and interesting. I think that at the end of the day, as I always say, we are ultimately the learners for life. I don't believe that 28 years of experience of any that we have achieved in life is one and all. I think we need to sort of treat every second, every moment as a beginning of learning. And that's the philosophy with which, even in the capacity of a Wadhwani Advantage leader of Wadhwani Foundation, and in terms of looking at how to sort of combine the approaches of social objectives of creating employment, which is jobs creation, which we all know is significantly important for any country, more so for the developing country and predominantly for India, as we all know, and combine that element with the approach that we typically adopt successfully in using capitalist principles. And before I come to the specific topic, very quickly in 2 minutes, let me sort of touch upon how it relates to the topic that I'm going to speak on. It's about knowledge, information, finance, and access. And our mission of the foundation is really to provide knowledge to the entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs are the ones who are supposed to solve the problems for the society. And they are in solving those problems for the society or ensuring that they create this opportunity at scale. They are basically ensuring that the knowledge results in wealth and well-being. And when we think about that particular objective, and we think about how does it result into the employment, which is a social objective, not only based on what we all know, but we all know that the livelihood is so important for all of us. Whether you are a professor, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you are any other sort of job seeker in any other domain, employment is pretty important. And therefore, combining these two really gives me a tremendous energy to sort of talk about this topic, because it's really about ensuring that the entrepreneurs have access to knowledge, they have access to information, they have access to money, which is finance, and through which we are able to bring about a change in the society by creating employment. So I think that's a very sort of quick background and preamble to what I'm going to speak on. So there are two sides to this coin, right? So we are talking about access to knowledge and information and access to finance. I'll talk about both. So let's look at the first aspect, which is access to knowledge and information. Now, what I'm going to do in this session is that I'm not going to sort of spew sort of different statistics in terms of what's happening, but I think the most important thing for any knowledge seeker is to find out why of everything that we do. And in my experience of 28 years and in the capacity of leading this foundation in India for Advantage program, I've kind of zeroed in on some of the factors which are hugely responsible for lack of access of knowledge and information. It is also a circular loop. When I think about access, I also think about usage, because a particular level of usage also results in particular level of access. And I think it's very important to understand that. So there are a couple of factors I'm going to talk about. First is, I think we are an information-rich and insight-poor country. We do not know what we do not know. When I look at it, when I talk to entrepreneurs, they have tremendous ambition, they have tremendous zeal, they want to do something good, they want to sort of be the job creators, they want to do something that no one else has done, or they want to emulate somebody who's a role model that they think has had a lot of wealth, etc. But I think there is a humility that is required by everyone. And when I look at it, I spot very clearly there is a deficiency in terms of lack of willingness to know what they do not know. There is an admission that we know certain things and we do not know certain things. But the primary reason of there is a poor access to knowledge is because while there is information a lot, we have the digital media, we have plethora of information. In fact, we have an overload of information. But we are not able to convert that into insight, simply because insight building starts with humility to accept what we do not know. That's a fundamental, real, important reason that we should really focus on. Ability to make a behavioral change and making them entrepreneurs and everybody understand that you might be a scholastic person, you might be PhD, you might be doctorate, you might be the greatest successful entrepreneur on earth, but there are always things that you do not know. And I think when look at that, the work that foundation is doing is precisely to change that mindset. So that's the first reason why we believe access to knowledge is a problem. Access to information is not, but access to knowledge. Insight building is taking a big hit. That's number one. Second is really, I think the whole idea about how knowledge translates into wealth and well-being. I can very clearly see there is a divide between those who want to seek knowledge and those who want to seek money. the one who create wealth. But I think we must understand and appreciate that there are examples in the society wherein the creation of knowledge really translates into wealth and well-being. People are able to understand the connect, and in fact, if you look at the empirical evidence, it's very clear that it's a virtuous circle, right? It's a virtuous circle. So when you create wealth, you have an ability or resource pool to access more knowledge. But when you access knowledge and use that knowledge, you have an ability to create more wealth, and then it goes circular. I think it's very important for all the people who push knowledge and create knowledge to understand that creating wealth out of it is not a crime. And those who seek money and want to create wealth must understand that it will not be sustainable unless there is a continuous knowledge creation, IP creation, feedback loop, feed forward loop. So that link fundamentally in the mind is missing, is one of the other reasons why there is poor access to knowledge and information, because the wealthy people after a certain amount of time stop really looking at creation of knowledge. And you will see that in the empirical evidence. The third generation, the fourth generation of a lot of family businesses really are the stages when the wealth destruction happens. That's because the sustenance of solving the problem, the society, and creating knowledge around that does not happen. That's very important. Second, the third reason is really the knowledge needs a guru and shishya. I think we have a dearth of both, and it's partly a bold statement I'm making, but I'm making it with a sort of awareness that when I talk about guru and shishya in our tradition, it's very clear that a shishya has to look at every piece of knowledge with an empty piece of glass. And guru, when they teach, and in fact, Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, actually said once that when you teach, you learn, right? And today we have us in a society when there's a culture of questioning, the culture of really looking at data, looking at empirical evidence, combine that with the gut or the intuition knowledge, and therefore ability to question your relationship with that of a guru or shishya is something which is missing. And that's something, Oriental science, we have so much wealth of knowledge that we have inherited from the past. But if you look at what we have been able to do with that knowledge, you hit a roadblock, right? You hit an obstacle. And that's principally because the Socratic method of questioning and continuously developing that loop is missing. So that's the third reason. I think there is also an absence of role models. So when we look at role models, it's very singular focus, right? So somebody who is wealthy, oh, fantastic. Somebody is a great businessman, businesswoman. Somebody who is very knowledgeable, oh, fantastic. He has a great knowledge. We don't see them together. The role models in terms of quantity and quality both are missing. Now, I'm also seeing there is a concept in psychology of derailment. Those who attain a particular knowledge, even after a certain point of time, derail because they believe that they have achieved it, they are the masters, and then they stop learning. On the other hand, there are wealthy people who also look at a lot of the knowledge creators and disseminators merely as resources to create wealth, not as equal participants in the society, basically to put them in the pedestal and create those role models. And that is something which is missing. The other reason is the modes of learning. And we all know that, literature, we are very good at literature, and it's very clear. Kerala is excellent at literature. Its tradition is very clear. In fact, entire India is very rich in literature. But today we must recognize that the modes of learning are changing pretty fast. It's visual, it's audio, it's experiential. If you look at the learning methods that we have, the knowledge that is disseminated to even the corporates, to entrepreneurs, today that basically is complete. It's not changed to the extent of having a good media mix in terms of what is it needed to be in terms of the knowledge in different media. So that's very, very important. I think the other is the lack of feedback loop, and that has to go with my earlier point in terms of having peer reviews, having understanding of, let's say a particular business falls short, right? What are the areas of why they are lacking today? For example, today one of the biggest problems that MSMEs face is demand. But if you look at the hue and cry about how much money is talked about, the access to credit, access to finance, they're talking about giving concessions, subsidies, recovering money from corporates, all sorts of things are talking about. But if you compare that with how much talk is happening on demand creation, which is one of the fundamental reasons why the loop is not created, it's very little, right? So it's very easy to complain about things are not happening. But what's the root cause, what's the correlating factors, and how should that result into feed forward for what we should be asking both the government as well as us is something which is missing, I feel. Adoption of technology and digitalization is another important factor, and this is something that we all read, so I'm not going to talk too much about that particular variable. I think just by using latest today, for example, Wadhwani Foundation does a lot of work in AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And trust me, there are a lot of tasks, a lot of skills which have been completely changed, right? There is a whole subject of reskilling, upskilling that is happening simply because the traditional skills are something which are being done by the latest technologies, developing intelligence, developing algorithms, and coming out with predictive insights is completely changing the game. Now, the faster we realize it as a society, the access to knowledge and usage of information and knowledge will become better and better. But I think that adoption is still, to my mind, is not taking at a pace which it should if India were to sort of revive the whole MSME community. The other factor is lack of culture of innovation and acceptance. There have been certain sort of initiatives, both in private as well as public sector by the government to incentivize innovation and creation of IP. But and that's a point related to the last point that I'm making on the slide as well, is that there is no acceptance of failures. And this is very, very harmful for innovation, right? Silicon Valley was not made just because somebody thought, we should create the infrastructure, give a lot of funding, and let's give it a push to entrepreneurs, to innovation, IP, and let's do it. No, there is an acceptance of society in a society that you could fail, and it's okay to fail. There are experiments that will succeed, there are experiments that will not succeed. The heart of entrepreneurship is basically to look at an opportunity or a problem statement in a society, build a use case, build great quality to solve that problem, then be speedy, and then build scale. Recently, I wrote in one of my articles about how MSMEs are facing a Bermuda Triangle of speed, scale, and quality. If you have quality, it's difficult to build scale at quality. It's difficult if you build sort of scale, then the quality deteriorates. And if you're doing both, invariably you could be slow, right? And I think that's something that we haven't cracked as an MSME community and as a society. And that's something which is very important to be cracked. So if you sort of collectively look at this problem, and I wanted to focus my entire session only on the drivers and why of this access to knowledge and information is about. I think if we are fundamentally able to solve some of these problems, we'll be in a far better position. So that's access to knowledge and information. Access to finance. And this is a peculiar one, and all of you MSMEs who might be sitting in the audience and policymakers know this very well, but I just thought let's take a recap of what's happening today in our country, right? We have less than 15% of MSMEs who have access to formal finance. Most of it is informal. There is a 500 billion credit deficit. There are different estimates. Our estimate is 500 billion credit deficit, which is 16% of the nominal GDP we have. On the other hand, we have NPAs that are feared to be ranging anywhere between 8% to 35%. There is no wonder that there is reluctance to fund MSMEs. So on one hand, it's a dichotomy, right? On one hand, you have hunger and need for money. On the other hand, the lenders are reluctant to sort of lend money because they fear that there is a repayment issue. And you know why there is a repayment issue? There is a repayment issue because the ability to think about the long-term and short-term, translate that into business plan and a viable sort of proposition wherein you can put in the borrowed money into productive use is a big question. So when I interact with a lot of the lending community, when I interact with MSMEs, they are very clear that they need to service the demand of so much working capital, so much term finance, etc. If you ask them and grill them on what are we going to do with that money and how, prove it to me based on data and facts that money is going to be converted into good money and it will fetch you returns, there are lots of question marks. So most of the MSMEs struggle with actually thinking about how to convince the bankers in terms of how to use that money perfectly. So that's where the catch is. I think that therefore the access becomes, on one hand, access is okay, but access will not be a problem if you have confidence in repayment. So I think that's very important. 80% of the borrowed capital is at high cost, right? Which we all know. And and then there is a lot of cost of intermediaries that needs to be brought down significantly. Unless one does that, it will be very tough for somebody to sort of carry that on. If you look at that as a borrowed capital, but on the equity side, 95% of the owners are reluctant to sell equity. And this is very important. If you look at in any developed nation and trace the history of 100 years of progress, there has been an acceptance that you can build business, but selling an equity in business doesn't mean it's a failure. Most of the sale that happens of equity in India today is because of distress sale. It's not necessarily because of higher valuations. And that's something we need to correct, because at the end of the day, you're creating value, your scale creates a value, and that value has to be realized by the owners at one point of time. So I think that's one of the important reasons as well. The other key reason of access to finance is poor is because of transparency and visibility. Even today, after the GSTN was conceptualized, after many years, we have only 12.8 million tax-paying enterprises out of 63.3, right? So that's a very small percentage. And the moment you come into the tax bracket, you are we all know today that MSME community, by and large, when I talk to people, I mean, we have solved about touched lives of 1,000 MSMEs by now in the last 2 years. We very clearly see this, right? There is a hesitance because there is an anxiety and there is lack of faith that figures that data that one shares is going to be used productively. And that hampers the progress because one is not transparent. And one is not transparent, that means the people who are going to lend money or going to give equity are going to be reluctant because we don't know the source of truth. We don't know the source of truth, then it becomes difficult to assess the case and feasibility of repayment. It becomes or the returns, and the moment the capital giver is unclear about the repayment or the returns, that person is not going to sort of give money. So I think it's a vicious circle we need to break. The last 2 points, and the portfolio problem is a big problem, especially, I'll come to that the last, in fact. The battle between socialist capital lenses is also very important. As you see today, whether it is state government or central government, we all know that we need to democratize and we need to help everybody. What I have learned so far is that it has to be also balanced with a portfolio decision making, which means there are certain areas where India is very good at, it has inherent strengths, and there are certain areas where India could become globally competitive. I think that has to be in alignment with the resource deployment that either private capital does or the government capital does, right? And today I see a problem there. There is a socialist lens and there is also capitalist lens, but both are fighting with each other. Those are not integrated. So I think that hampers the policy development and it results into sort of imbalance. So that's something that needs to be attacked. And finally, at the operational level, I see MSMEs basically lacking stringent project management skills. So for every great strategy, for every great plan, there has to be a great execution. For great execution, one needs to build the management capability of project management, right? It's not about change management, it's about project management, it's about people management. But at the end of the day, the operational excellence that goes hand in hand with what your grand plan is really the proof of success. And that's something which is lacking big time. The final point is the third from the last, which I was going to take up, bad money chasing good money. I suspect, and in one of my articles I've written, that in India you could face two scenarios. One is by 2027, we have a potential to basically contribute to about 40% or 38% of our GDP from the current one level. We also have ability or potential to create 50 million additional jobs. But the second scenario I'm also thinking, and we see from the data, so if we don't get it right, then we have a potential to go back to a contribution to even 20% or 18% from the current 30% and actually witness a massive unemployment figure, right? And we don't want to do that, but I think these are the splintered scenario that I see happening. And that's one of the reasons is that we could actually fall in the credit trap. And the credit trap is all about giving money, but not knowing about the returns and the repayment. And it results into actually bad money resulting in bad money, chasing good money. And then that really erodes the ability of the nation to become competitive globally. So I think these are the different areas that we must focus our attention on when it comes to finance.